Welcome to The Budding Writer. This podcast offers an outlet for aspiring authors to showcase their original short stories or fan fiction one-shots. I'm your narrator, Shayna Armand. This is how it works. When you hear this sound, the story will begin, and when you hear it again, the story has ended. Today's original story is actually a drama, and it is written by an anonymous author, and it probably has something to do with the warnings I'm about to let you know that this is not safe for work. It's not sexually explicit. It doesn't have any cursing in it, but there is references to sexual situations and child abuse, so you have been warned. The Prayer Dolls by Anonymous. Narrated by Shayna Armand. As he followed the procession to the front of the church, the congregants of St. Maria Catholic Church have all risen in respect for their presence. Monsignor John Dubois had been a priest for 52 years, and still he had to control the urge to sneeze from the local incense that the parish ordered through the diocese. Of course, there were a great many things that he disagreed with, not the least of which was the incense. Monsignor glanced at Father Donald from behind the podium, and it was hard to contain his expression of disgust. A priest was supposed to maintain a visage of gentle non-judgment, but the whole situation did not sit well with him. "All rise," said Father Donald. "The Lord be with you." "And with your spirit," the congregants replied in unison. The Monsignor wondered if they knew who they were repeating the blessing to, if they would be so ready to repeat the practiced monotone reply. Had he known what kind of choice the bishop would have made, the Monsignor would never have made the request for a younger replacement. At 74 years old, he knew his time was growing near. Oh, he had a few years left, but it was a far better idea to be available to a new priest and introduce him to a small-town church such as this. The Monsignor had grown up here. His favorite cousin, Verna Rose, was sitting in the third pew, the way she had every Sunday since he had returned from his assignments abroad. Her family attended with her, and now the third pew was entirely occupied by the generations of her offspring, as well as some on the fourth row. Yu Sang Wen and his young family sat in the middle. The Chinese immigrants were welcomed by him personally when they requested an American baptism. And Morgan Broussard, who had been a deacon for 10 years, his son was now one of the altar boys. How could he possibly leave these trusting, loving parishioners to the guidance of this pathetic excuse of a man who calls himself a servant of God? Bishop Harris called him 2 weeks ago with the news of his replacement. Father Richard Donald needed to transfer to a small, quiet town away from troubled issues. What type of troubled issues? Well, it seems that a 10-year-old girl who was being counseled in a group had pointed the finger at Father Donald because he had touched her inappropriately. The bishop's voice intimated over the phone that the little girl was obviously just trying to get attention. It was not unheard of. There had been incidents where priests were responsible for molestations. The Monsignor felt these people did not need to be working for the diocese, and he certainly didn't approve of the way the Vatican had chosen to handle the situation. Until today, he had never felt a need to address the problem. He had never had it personally touch his life. John Dubois had felt the call to God's service when he was only 8 years old. He had been an altar boy until he was 16, under the counsel of Father Wallace, a wonderful priest. Father Wallace was a hard taskmaster, and upon learning of the 17-year-old John's intent to go into seminary, the father sat him down and told him the most important information in regard to the life in service to God. "Son, we are all human, but we aspire to be God's vessels here on earth. This is the hardest path you have ever chosen. The Bible says a lot of things about fornication and perversion. Man by nature is weak and will fall to temptation. Sometimes a man of God must take measures not to fall in with the devil." John was no fool, and was shocked to the core that his own priest was advising him on masturbation. Feeling somewhat embarrassed and betrayed, John immediately left Father Wallace's office and set out on his path. It wasn't until his first assignment in Los Angeles, while training with Monsignor Rosa, that he understood what Father Wallace was trying to tell him. Monsignor Rosa had been a missionary and trained as a doctor before going into the clergy. He was a kind man who fought to hold soup kitchens for the homeless and Spanish Mass when it was frowned upon. Unable to sleep one night, John had gotten up in the middle of the night and passed Rosa's room. The door had been open ajar, and when he looked in, the sight that welcomed him was truly a strain on his own soul. The father was lying in bed, sleeping next to Greta, the rectory housekeeper. They were very comfortable in each other's arms, and what should have seemed like the basest violation of their vows to God seemed to be a very beautiful and natural moment. It was all John could do not to scream the way his own mind rebelled at what he was witnessing. Instead, John turned back to his room, his glass of warm milk and cookie forgotten. For the next couple of days, John watched the interactions between the housekeeper and the father, and he realized that they were friends, and it was clear that their rapport was based on love and respect. And as Father Wallace had told him, man by nature is weak. He never spoke to Father Rosa of what he saw that night. A few years after he had been transferred, the Monsignor learned that Father Rosa had left the clergy and married Greta. This news led him to the most important realization about becoming a priest. An earthbound relationship was the missing piece of a priest's living soul that he had to give up. Priests were asked to forsake a basic part of their human nature to connect physically with another, for the ethereal, incorporeal love and connection to God. However, this did not mean they would go untested. It did not negate their natural feelings or the pain of that loss. And from that realization, John took Father Wallace's sage advice. The more Monsignor Dubois traveled, the more he met with other types of depravity within the system. Weak-willed men who should never have taken service, or the ones who hid behind the cloth in order to remain untainted by allegations. Monsignor was never so trusting of anyone after his life of experience. God was the only one without suspicion. It was this in mind that he— "Monsignor?" the young boy in front of him whispered. The Monsignor realized he had been lost in thought all the way through the giving of the host. The altar boy stood in front of him, presenting the chalice that contained the body of Christ for distribution to the congregants. Taking the chalice, the Monsignor slowly walked to the front of the pulpit and began to dole out the tiny pieces of compressed bread to each member. When he could finally make a decision about where he wanted to be transferred, he came home to the town he loved and the people he knew. He buried parents, baptized children, and married more than a few of the couples walking up the center of the church. He would not allow this man, no, this monster, to hurt his parishioners. Bella Landry, an 8-year-old who only received her first communion just last year, held out her right hand for the host and was clutching the oddest-looking doll with her left. It looked similar to Bella herself, and it was hand-painted with its hands in prayer. "Well, hello, petite fille. What have you got there?" the Monsignor asked. "This is my prayer doll. Daddy sent it from Greece." Bella's father was stationed at the American Embassy in Athens. His family would be joining him after school ended for the summer. "What does it do?" the Monsignor questioned. "She prays for me," she giggled and whispered in a low voice, "just in case I fall asleep before I finish." "What a good idea. I need one like that." The Monsignor finished the service with the prayer doll foremost in his mind. It gave him an idea that he immediately acted on. "Bob, could you come see me for a minute?" The new deacon was a family man, and his wife had recently given birth. Bob was a carpenter by trade, but his real love was carving. Yes, Monsignor, what can I do for you? I need you to do me a favor, the Monsignor said. The next Sunday there was a commotion at the front of the church. Several of the people were gathered around the left front pew. Father Donald was among them, and they all seemed to be talking at once as if in an argument. This is the silliest darn thing I've ever seen, Father Donald said. It's sacrilegious, I tell you. You think everything's sacrilegious, Celia. Shut up, Martin. Kiss my... Whoa! The Monsignor broke in. What seems to be the problem? As he walked through the crowd. Exasperated, Father Donald motioned toward the first pew and pointed. That. In the first pew, where Bob Jensen and his family usually sat, 5 dolls sat there in place, including a small baby resting in the mother doll's arms. As Father Donald reached down to pick up the dolls, there was a scream from the back of the crowded room. Bella Landry nudged her way up to the front and stood with her arms out to protect the miniature family. You can't touch them till after Mass. They're praying. Bella, please step away, her grandmother corrected as she neared the front. The Monsignor patted the young girl on the head. It's okay, Bella. Go sit with your Momo. Exasperated, Father Donald cut in. Monsignor, you can't seriously consider. The father was silenced by the stern look that Monsignor gave him. Let it go, Father Donald. It's just dolls. But that was only the beginning. Each week, more and more dolls began to appear in the place of the congregants, but less people were attending the church. Father Donald ranted in suppressed anger at his terrible debut of the first few services at this church. Probably the most notable was the absence of the 2 entire rows of churchgoers that encompassed Verna Rose's family. The Monsignor nearly laughed at the rotund doll with the curly red hair that was wearing a flowered muumuu. It was a dead ringer for his cousin. The more dolls that appeared to pray for the missing people, the lower the contributions were in the collection plate. A month after the first dolls appeared, the Monsignor received a call from the bishop. What the H-E double hockey sticks is going on, John? The bishop asked. It's still a curse word if you spell it, Sam, Monsignor said. I don't give a damn. Father Donald has been whining to me about some kind of congregation of dolls. Why are you allowing this to go on? It's not my decision. I was informed by the deacons that people don't want to be counseled by Father Donald. I don't mean to cast stones. The Monsignor waited for him to fill in the blanks. But you think his reputation has preceded him, the bishop replied. Yes. The bishop heaved an audible sigh. The damn internet is killing us off these days. It's not just that, Sam. The people need to have confidence in their priests, not be terrified of them, the Monsignor admonished. I know that, but have you seen the lack of recruitment? That's no excuse, and you know it. Something has to change. People just feel they can't trust someone who speaks the circle of life and has never experienced it. I hear the conviction in your voice, John, but there's not much a couple of old geezers like ourselves can do about Vatican politics. We can do something about this situation, can't we? Yes, you are probably right. Maybe Father Donald needs to spend some time in our foreign missions. Let the fervor die down. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to wait a few more months until we can find you a new replacement. Don't you worry about that, the Monsignor assured him. One of the deacons helped me post a bulletin on the Vatican website in regard to a replacement. Once I find someone, I will call for your approval. The bishop made the decision and informed Father Donald a few days later that he was being transferred to a mission in South Africa that needed help and guidance. Flabbergasted, Father Donald began making preparations for the long trip. However, it wasn't until an hour before his taxi would arrive to take him to the airport that Monsignor Dubois spoke with him. Why did they do this? Father Donald asked as he finished packing his carry-on luggage. Because you need to learn some discipline that only foreign travel can provide. Oh, and because I told them to, the Monsignor replied. Father Donald turned to him incredulously. What? Young man, you are sick and need help, and I won't have you tainting this town with your neurosis. The South African mission has a friend of mine working there. Is this about Sarah Jones? The father burst. That child is the one who needs help. She told a bunch of stories. She's pregnant. The Monsignor cut him off. Father Donald stood still with a look of horror and shock. Sarah Jones is among the many unfortunate little girls who suffer from premature menstruation, and thus capable of being pregnant at such a young age. Look, There was really nothing he could say. Such things never happened. Were not supposed to happen. Quite frankly, he'd just been scared beyond any reply. Father Donald dropped into a chair and began to cry. Richard, I don't care what your justification is. You have left that little girl only two options. One is dying while giving birth because her body is too small to handle such a thing, or, which is ultimately her parents' decision, to have an abortion to save her life. I am personally going to make sure you are removed from the clergy, but not before I try to help you. 2 months later, Monsignor was writing at his desk, trying to come up with a little joke that would serve a purpose and keep the attention of his congregation. He heard a knock at the door. Come in. Bob Jensen walked in with a tall young man who looked to be in his late 20s, dressed in seminary clothing. Monsignor, I'm just dropping off Father Walsh to you. Monsignor rose from his desk and shook the young man's hand. Of course. Good to meet you, Father. Please sit down. I understand that you were forced to transfer here under duress. The young priest obviously looked uncomfortable at realizing that the Monsignor was fully apprised of his reprimand by the diocese. Yes, sir. Drop the sir and call me John, the Monsignor demanded. David, I specifically requested your presence because of your situation. I've been a priest for a very long time, and I might just be able to help you start some changes. Father Walsh began to smile in realization of what he had actually been transferred for. He and several other priests were involved in a motion to have the holy doctrine of Vatican law changed, to allow priests to get married and have fully involved relationships, and more well-rounded lives, so that the priests might relate more easily with their parishioners. This being an extremely volatile subject, the members of this group were trying to be discouraged and suppressed from voicing their opinions. This is refreshing, sir. John, priests of your experience usually support the celibacy law. The Monsignor smiled also. Well, before I started seminary, my parish priest gave me some very good advice. Thank you so much for being with us today, and I hope you will tune in every Friday for more stories shared by new writers. If you are a writer yourself and would like to share on one of our podcasts, please send an email to thebuddingwriterpodcast@gmail.com. That's thebuddingwriterpodcast@gmail.com, and we will reply with the information needed to enter a submission. My name is Shayna Armin, and this was The Budding Writer. Until next time, I hope all your stories have happy endings.